I'm Maya, 30 years old, and I've spent the last 4 years rebuilding my dignity from the ground up to protect the two innocent secrets holding my hand. The rain wasn't just falling, it was assaulting us. It lashed against Fifth Avenue like sheets of gray steel, soaking through the thin fabric of my thrift store coat in seconds. I shivered, the cold biting deep into my bones. The grocery bags digging into my left shoulder felt like they were filled with lead, not bread and milk. Mama, I'm cold, Leo whined, his voice small and trembling against the roar of the city traffic. I know, baby, I know, I said, my voice tight. We're almost to the subway, just a few more steps. I tightened my grip on his small, warm hand. On my other side, Sarah was silent, clutching my fingers so hard her knuckles were white. We were three ghosts trying to navigate a world built for giants. The crosswalk signal flickered to the white walking man. Okay, quickly now, I urged them. We stepped off the curb and into the river of slush that lined the gutter. My boot sprang a leak instantly, freezing muddy water soaking my sock. I kept my head down against the wind. I just wanted to get home. I just wanted to lock the door and pretend this city hadn't chewed me up and spit me out. I didn't see the car coming. I heard it first. It wasn't the rattle of a taxi or the rumble of a bus. It was a low, predatory growl, a beast waking up. Then came the screech. It was the sound of expensive rubber fighting a losing battle against wet asphalt. The noise was deafening, a violent shriek that vibrated through the soles of my feet and straight up my spine. I froze. Instinct took over before my brain could process the danger. I didn't jump away. I threw my body sideways, shoving Leo and Sarah behind my legs, shielding them with my own soaking wet frame. The wind of the stopping vehicle hit me before the metal did. The car stopped. It came to a halt inches, literally inches from my knees. I could feel the heat radiating from the massive engine block, fighting the chill of the rain. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, beating so hard I felt dizzy. I gasped for air, adrenaline flooding my system with a metallic taste. I looked up, ready to scream, ready to yell at the reckless driver who had almost orphaned my children. Then I saw the hood ornament, the double M Maybach. Matte black paint that seemed to absorb the streetlights rather than reflect them. My stomach dropped out of my body. The air left my lungs and refused to return. I knew this car. I knew the custom paint job. I knew the arrogant, aggressive way it nosed into crosswalks. The windshield wipers swept across the glass, clearing the rain for one terrifying, crystal-clear second. The interior light was on, casting a warm, golden glow inside the cabin that looked like a different world compared to the cold misery outside. I locked eyes with the driver. Julian, 4 years, 1,460 days of hiding. Gone in the span of a heartbeat. He looked older. His jaw was sharper, the lines around his eyes deeper, but it was him. He was wearing that midnight blue tuxedo he always favored for galas, his hands gripping the leather steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. He looked like a king sitting on a throne of leather and steel. And I stood there, a drowned rat in the headlights, clutching two children he didn't know existed. Time unraveled. The noise of the city faded into a dull hum. It was just me and him, separated by a pane of reinforced glass and a lifetime of secrets. Then I noticed the passenger. She was beautiful. That was the first thing that hit me, a painful, gut-wrenching realization of her perfection. Her blonde hair was a sleek curtain of gold, untouched by the storm. Diamonds glittered at her throat, catching the ambient light. She was pressing a hand to her chest, her mouth open in a small O of shock. She looked at me with confusion. She didn't know who I was. Why would she? I was just a woman in the way. But Julian knew. I saw the color drain from his face. It happened instantly, turning his tan skin to a sickly shade of gray. His eyes widened, losing their usual cool, calculated composure. He looked terrified. Then his gaze shifted. He broke eye contact with me. His eyes drifted down. He looked at the two small heads peeking out from behind my coat. He saw Leo's unruly dark curls matted with rain. He saw Sarah's wide, terrified hazel eyes staring back at the monster machine. His curls, his eyes, I saw his lips part. He mouthed a word I couldn't hear, but I felt the impact of it slam into my chest like a physical blow. Twins. The fiancée turned her head. She followed his gaze. She looked from Julian's horrified face to the children and then back to him. Her confusion was rapidly curdling into suspicion. The traffic light blinked red. A taxi behind the Maybach laid on its horn, a long, angry blast that shattered the spell. Panic, hot and sharp, finally pierced through my shock. "Move," I whispered to myself. I grabbed Leo and Sarah's hands so hard they yelped. I didn't care. I had to run. I had to disappear. I dragged them toward the sidewalk, my boots splashing violently in the puddles. I didn't look back. I couldn't look back. But I could feel his gaze burning a hole between my shoulder blades. He had seen us. The ghost he discarded had just materialized on Fifth Avenue, and I had brought his secret heirs right to his front bumper. I'm Maya, 30 years old, and I've spent the last 4 years rebuilding my dignity from the ground up to protect the two innocent secrets holding my hand. I tried to move. My feet scrambled for traction on the slick pavement, dragging Leo and Sarah toward the safety of the curb, but the sound behind me froze my blood. It wasn't the engine revving. It was the distinct, heavy thud of a car door being thrown open. I shouldn't have turned around. Every survival instinct I possessed screamed at me to keep running, to vanish into the steam and shadows of the city. But my body betrayed me. I spun on my heel, my breath hitching in a painful throat spasm. Julian was standing in the street. I watched paralyzed as his polished Italian leather shoe slammed down into a deep, oily puddle. Muddy water splashed up, staining the hem of his pristine tuxedo trousers, but he didn't even flinch. He didn't look down. He didn't care about the rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead or the ruin of a suit that cost more than my annual rent. He was looking at me. Cars behind the Maybach were laying on their horns now, a cacophony of rage echoing off the skyscrapers. A taxi driver leaned out his window screaming obscenities. Julian acted as if they didn't exist. He stood in the middle of traffic like a statue carved from shock and disbelief, oblivious to the chaos he was causing. I felt the blood drain from my face so fast it left me lightheaded. My pulse wasn't just beating. It was drumming a frantic, irregular rhythm in my ears, drowning out the rain. My hands shook violently where I gripped my children's shoulders. I tried to pull them behind the folds of my soaking wet coat, trying to make them smaller, trying to make them invisible. It was too late. Julian took a step forward, ignoring the blare of a delivery truck swerving around his open door. His gaze dropped from my face to the two terrified toddlers clinging to my legs. The air between us crackled, charged with a history I had tried so hard to bury. He looked at Leo first. My son stared back, his small brow furrowed in that exact, stubborn way Julian used to look when he was closing a deal. Then Julian's eyes shifted to Sarah. She blinked, rain dripping from her lashes, revealing eyes that were the color of a stormy sea. His eyes, piercing, unmistakable steel gray. I saw Julian's knees buckle slightly. He gripped the top of the car door for support, his knuckles turning white. The color had vanished from his complexion. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost, or perhaps his own reflection staring back at him from 3 feet off the ground. Maya, he whispered. I didn't hear it over the traffic, but I saw his lips shape my name. It looked like a curse. Then the passenger door opened. If Julian was a storm cloud, she was a flash of lightning. A woman stepped out into the deluge, completely unsuited for the weather. She was a vision in white silk, a gown that shimmered even in the gloom. She held a tiny, useless clutch purse over her head as if it could shield her from the downpour. Julian, what on earth are you doing? Her voice was high, shrill, and laced with the kind of entitlement that made my stomach churn. She rounded the hood of the car, her heels clicking sharply on the asphalt before she, too, stepped into the slush. She grimaced, looking down at her ruined shoes with disgust. Get back in the car, we're going to be late for the engagement party, she snapped, grabbing his arm. Julian didn't move, he didn't even acknowledge her touch. He was still locked on Leo and Sarah, his chest heaving as he forgot to breathe. The woman followed his gaze. She looked at me, a soaking wet, shivering mess in a thrift store coat. Her nose wrinkled in distaste. Then she looked at the children. She didn't see the resemblance. She only saw the inconvenience. She turned her glare back to Julian, shaking his arm roughly. Julian, who is this woman? Why are we stopping for a beggar? The word slapped me across the face harder than the rain. Beggar. I tightened my grip on Leo's hand until he squirmed. I wanted to scream. I wanted to vomit. But mostly I wanted to wake up from this nightmare. Julian finally tore his eyes away from the twins. He looked at his fiancée, then back at me. The shock in his eyes was hardening into something else, something dangerous. She's not a beggar, he said, his voice low and rough, cutting through the noise of the street. He took another step toward me, closing the distance. The rain ran down his face like tears he refused to shed. She's my ex-wife. I stopped breathing. The secret was out in the open air, wet and shivering and impossible to take back. I looked at the twins, then back at the billionaire who had just shattered my world for the second time. And he added, his voice trembling as he pointed a shaking finger at Leo. Who are they? I'm Maya, 30 years old, and I've spent the last 4 years convincing myself that I am enough, even without the billions attached to the man who broke me. His question hung in the wet air between us, heavy and suffocating. Who are they? The 3 words didn't just vibrate in my ears. They traveled down my spine and kicked open a door in my mind I had welded shut 4 years ago. Suddenly, I wasn't standing on a rain-slicked avenue in Manhattan anymore. I was back in that studio apartment in Red Hook. I could smell the briny, rotting scent of the harbor drifting in through the cracked window. I could feel the lumpy mattress sagging beneath my weight, the metal springs digging into my thighs through my thin pajama pants. I remembered the silence. It was the kind of silence that rings in your ears, louder than any scream. Julian was standing by the door then, just like he was standing by the car now. Back then, he wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing a cashmere sweater I had been terrified to touch for fear of ruining it. He was packing a leather duffel bag. I remembered the sound of the zipper. Zip. It sounded like a body bag closing. It's not you, Maya, he had said, refusing to look me in the eye. It's the family. You know how my father is. He has expectations. I sat on the bed, my hands clenched so tight in my lap that my fingernails cut half moons into my palms. Expectations, I had whispered. A legacy, he corrected, his voice devoid of the warmth I had fallen in love with. He'll never accept a girl from the docks, Maya. You don't fit the narrative. You don't fit the portfolio. Portfolio. He spoke about our love like it was a bad stock option he needed to dump before the market opened. I tasted salt in my mouth then. I was crying silent, hot tears that tracked down my face and dripped onto my collarbone. But the salt wasn't just from tears. It was the taste of the ocean, the taste of my poverty, the taste of the life he was running away from. I had a secret in my right hand. I was clenching it so hard the plastic was biting into my skin. A white stick, two pink lines. I had found out an hour before he arrived. I had planned to tell him the moment he walked through the door. I had imagined his smile. I had imagined him picking me up and spinning me around in that tiny, cramped room. But he didn't pick me up. He picked up his bag. I watched him walk out the door. I wanted to scream, "I'm pregnant. Don't go, you're leaving your family." But my pride choked me. If I wasn't good enough for him as I wasn't going to trap him with a baby. I wasn't going to be the charity case he resented for the rest of his life. So I let him go. I sat there shivering on that terrible mattress, clutching the positive test like a lifeline, and I listened. I listened to his footsteps fade down the hallway. I listened to the heavy front door of the building slam shut. I listened to the engine of his car, that same arrogant engine purring in front of me now roar to life and fade into the night. He drove away toward his billions, and I stayed behind with the nausea and the fear. The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow, snapping me back to the present. The rain was freezing, but my face felt like it was on fire. The abandonment I had buried under layers of hard work and motherhood tore open in my chest. It felt fresh. It felt raw, it bled. I looked at Julian. He was still waiting for an answer. The rain dripped from his nose, ruining the perfection of his face. He looked desperate. He looked at Leo, whose dark curls were plastered to his forehead. He looked at Sarah, whose gray eyes were wide with confusion. He was doing the math. I could see the numbers crunching behind his eyes. 4 years, 2 children who looked to be about 3.5. The timeline was a noose, and he was sticking his head right into it. "Maya," he choked out again, taking another step. He reached a hand out, his fingers trembling. "Are they?" "Don't," I snapped. The word ripped out of my throat, harsh and guttural. My protective instinct surged, overriding the shock. I yanked the twins back, shielding them with my body. I wasn't the girl on the lumpy mattress anymore. I wasn't the girl who let him walk away without a fight. I was a mother. And this man, this billionaire in his ruined tuxedo with his diamond-clad fiancée looking on in horror, had lost the right to ask questions the night he drove away. "Don't you dare come near them," I hissed, my voice shaking with a rage that had been fermenting for 1,460 days. "Answer me." He roared, his composure shattering completely. "Are they mine?" the fiancée gasped. "Julian, have you lost your mind? Look at them, they're street urchins." Her words were the spark. I was the gasoline. I stood up straighter, water streaming down my face, and I looked him dead in the eye. "Yours," I laughed, a bitter, broken sound that hurt my throat. "You gave up your rights to yours when you decided I wasn't good enough for your portfolio." I tightened my grip on the twins' hands. "Come on, Leo. Come on, Sarah." I turned my back on him. I started to walk away, but Julian didn't let me go this time. I heard his shoes slap the wet pavement behind me. I felt his hand clamp onto my shoulder, spinning me around. "I said," he snarled, his face inches from mine, his eyes wild with a mixture of hope and terror. "Are they mine?" Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the ground beneath us, but it was nothing compared to the storm breaking in his eyes. "I'm Maya, 30 years old, and I've spent the last 4 years convincing myself that I am a fortress, impervious to the man who treated my heart like a bad investment." But as the rain lashed against the pavement, his 3 words breached my walls instantly. "Who are they?" The question didn't just vibrate in my ears. It traveled down my spine. It kicked open a door in my mind I had welded shut 1,460 days ago. Suddenly, the roar of Manhattan traffic faded into a dull, terrifying hum. I wasn't standing on a rain-slicked avenue anymore. I was back in that studio apartment in Red Hook. I could smell the briny, rotting scent of the harbor drifting in through the cracked window. I could feel the lumpy mattress sagging beneath my weight, the metal springs digging into my thighs through my thin pajama pants. I remembered the silence. It was the kind of silence that rings in your ears, louder than any scream. Julian was standing by the door then, just like he was standing by the car now. Back then, he wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing a charcoal cashmere sweater I had been terrified to touch for fear of ruining it. He was packing a leather duffel bag. I heard the sound of the zipper again. Zip. It sounded like a body bag closing over my future. "It's not you, Maya," he had said, refusing to look me in the eye. "It's the family. You know how my father is." I sat on the bed, my hands clenched so tight in my lap that my fingernails cut half moons into my palms. "He has expectations," Julian continued, his voice devoid of the warmth I had fallen in love with. "A legacy. You don't fit the narrative, Maya. You don't fit the portfolio." Portfolio. He spoke about our love like it was a failing stock option he needed to dump before the market opened. I tasted salt in my mouth then. I was crying silent, hot tears that tracked down my face and dripped onto my collarbone. But I was holding a secret in my right hand. I was clenching it so hard the plastic casing was biting into my skin. A white stick, 2 pink lines. I had found out an hour before he arrived. I had planned to tell him the moment he walked through the door. I had imagined his smile. I had imagined him picking me up and spinning me around in that tiny, cramped room. But he didn't pick me up. He picked up his bag. I watched him walk out the door. I wanted to scream, "I'm pregnant. Don't go, you're leaving your family." But my pride choked me. If I wasn't good enough for him as I wasn't going to trap him. I wasn't going to be the charity case he resented for the rest of his life. So I let him go. I listened to his footsteps fade down the hallway. I listened to the engine of his car, that same arrogant engine purring in front of me now, roar to life and fade into the night. A crack of thunder snapped me back to the present. The memory receded, leaving my chest hollow and aching. The rain was freezing, but my face felt like it was on fire. I looked at Julian. He was still waiting for an answer, his chest heaving beneath his soaked dress shirt. He looked at Leo, whose dark curls were plastered to his forehead. He looked at Sarah, his gray eyes were wide with confusion. He was doing the math. I could see the numbers crunching behind his desperate gaze. 4 years since the breakup. 2 children who looked exactly 3.5 years old. The timeline was a noose and he was sticking his head right into it. "Maya," he choked out, taking a step forward. His hand reached out, trembling, his fingers extending toward Sarah's damp curls. My maternal instinct surged like a physical blow. I stepped back, my heels clicking sharply on the asphalt. "Don't," I snapped. The word ripped out of my throat, harsh and guttural. I yanked the twins back, shielding them with my body. I wasn't the girl on the lumpy mattress anymore. I was a mother. "Don't you dare come near them," I hissed, my voice trembling with a ferocity I didn't know I possessed. His fiancée gasped. She looked from Julian to the twins, her hand flying to her throat. She saw the timeline too. "Julian," she shrieked, her voice shrill and panicked. "Have you lost your mind? We have to go. Look at them, they're just street urchins." Her words were the spark. I was the gasoline. I stood up straighter, water streaming down my face, and I looked Julian dead in the eye. "Answer me," he roared, ignoring her completely, his composure shattering. Are they mine?" I laughed. It was a bitter, broken sound that hurt my throat. "Yours," I spat the word out like poison. "You gave up your rights to yours when you decided I wasn't good enough for your portfolio." I tightened my grip on the twins' hands. "Come on, Leo, come on, Sarah." I turned my back on him. I started to walk away into the dark, wet night. But Julian didn't let me go this time. I heard his expensive dress shoes slap the wet pavement behind me. I felt his hand clamp onto my shoulder, spinning me around with a force that nearly made me drop my umbrella. I said, he snarled, his face inches from mine, water dripping from his nose onto my lips. His eyes were wild, swirling with a mixture of hope and absolute terror. Are they mine? I'm Maya, 30 years old, and I have spent every single day of the last 4 years building a fortress around my heart to protect two innocent children from the man who broke it. But fortresses aren't built to withstand a siege at midnight. I was sitting on my lumpy beige sofa, staring at a patch of peeling paint on the wall. My hands were wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone ice cold an hour ago. The adrenaline from the street encounter had finally crashed, leaving me shivering and hollow. I had run from him. I had grabbed Leo and Sarah, flagged down a taxi with the ferocity of a cornered animal, and fled before Julian could get another word out. I thought I had escaped. I thought the rain and the city traffic had swallowed us up, hiding us back in the shadows where we belonged. I was wrong. Bzzzzzzzt. The sound of the intercom screamed through the silence of the apartment. It was a jarring, electric shriek that made me jump so hard I spilled the cold tea onto my jeans. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at the digital clock on the microwave. 12:14 a.m. No one buzzes my apartment at this hour, not unless it's bad news or not unless it's him. I sat frozen for a moment, praying it would stop, praying he would go away. Bzzzzzzzt. Longer this time, impatient, demanding. He knew I was up there. He knew because he hadn't just let me walk away. He must have followed the taxi. He must have watched me carry two sleeping toddlers up 3 flights of stairs. I stood up, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. I walked to the door, my hand hovered over the deadbolt. I could feel his presence on the other side of the wood, a heavy, suffocating weight. If I didn't open it, he would wake the neighbors. He would wake the kids. I took a deep breath, unlocked the bolt, and opened the door. Julian was standing there. He looked like a ghost of the composed billionaire I had seen on the street. His tuxedo jacket was gone. His white dress shirt was soaked through, clinging to his chest and transparent enough to show the tension in his muscles. His silk tie hung loose around his neck like a broken noose. But it was his eyes that terrified me. They were bloodshot, rimmed with red, wild with a mixture of exhaustion and adrenaline. He didn't ask to come in. He didn't say hello. He just pushed past me, his shoulder brushing mine, bringing the smell of expensive scotch and cold rain into my tiny sanctuary. "Julian, get out," I whispered, my voice trembling. "The kids are sleeping." He didn't hear me, or maybe he just didn't care. He walked into the center of my living room, his expensive leather shoes squeaking on the cheap, warped laminate flooring. He looked massive in the space. My entire apartment is 400 square feet. He owns walk-in closets bigger than my life. He spun around, his gaze darting frantically, dissecting my reality. He looked at the plastic bins overflowing with second-hand toys I had bought from Goodwill. He looked at the mismatched furniture I had dragged up from the curb and reupholstered myself. He looked at the damp stain on the ceiling that the landlord refused to fix. He was seeing it all: the poverty, the struggle, the undeniable evidence of how his children had been living while he slept on high thread count sheets. Then he stopped. His eyes locked onto the mantel above the electric heater. I stopped breathing. That was where I kept the timeline. The photos. He walked toward them, his movements slow and trance-like. His hand reached out, his fingers trembling violently. He picked up a small silver frame. It was a picture of the twins in the hospital incubators, tiny and fighting for breath, tubes taped to their faces. He stared at it. He picked up the next one. Leo and Sarah blowing out 2 candles on a grocery store cake sitting at a wobbly plastic table. Julian made a sound. It was a strangled, broken noise like something inside him had snapped. He turned to face me, still clutching the photo frame. The arrogance was gone. The anger was gone. It was replaced by a devastation so deep it made my stomach turn. "You lived here?" he whispered, his voice cracking. He gestured around the room with the hand holding the photo. They lived like this." "We survived," I said, my chin lifting defensively. "We didn't need you." "Need me?" He laughed, but it sounded like a sob. He took a step toward me, closing the distance between us. His eyes searched my face, looking for the girl he had left behind, but finding only the tired mother he had created. "I missed it," he choked out. The realization hit him in real time. I watched the numbers crunching in his head again, but this time it wasn't about paternity. It was about time, irretrievable time. "I missed their first steps," he said, his voice rising. "I missed their first words. I missed 4 years, Maya." He grabbed my shoulders. His grip was desperate, his fingers digging into my skin. "Why?" he roared, the volume shattering the quiet of the night. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me walk away if you were carrying my children? I'm Maya, 30 years old, and I have just learned that the only thing more dangerous than a man with a broken heart is a woman terrified of losing his wallet." The morning sun was too bright. It glared off the metal slide where Leah was trying to climb up the wrong way. My eyes felt like they were filled with sand. I hadn't slept. Not after Julian had stormed out of my apartment at 2:00 a.m., leaving the scent of his cologne and his devastation lingering in the stale air of my living room. I was running on caffeine and anxiety, sitting on a splintered wooden bench at the edge of the playground. I watched Sarah dig a hole in the wood chips with a broken stick. My hands were wrapped around a paper coffee cup that was already lukewarm. I took a sip, grimacing at the bitter taste. Then I heard it, the distinct, sharp click of stilettos on pavement. It was a sound that didn't belong here among the squeaky swings and the shouting toddlers. I stiffened. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. My stomach twisted into a knot, a physical reaction to the predator approaching from the rear. "Maya." Her voice was smooth, cool, and utterly devoid of warmth. I turned my head slowly. Lydia was standing there. She looked like she had stepped out of a magazine spread, wearing a camel-colored trench coat that probably cost more than my car. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a sleek, severe bun. Her sunglasses were oversized, hiding her eyes, but I could feel her gaze dissecting me. She didn't look like the panicked woman from the rainstorm last night. She looked calculated. She looked dangerous. "What do you want, Lydia?" I asked, my voice hoarse. She didn't ask if she could sit. She just lowered herself onto the bench, leaving a deliberate foot of space between us. She crossed her legs, the expensive fabric of her trousers rustling softly. She pulled a checkbook out of her designer bag, a literal checkbook. I stared at it, confused. Who even carries those anymore? She uncapped a gold pen, the click sounding like a gunshot in the morning air. "I'm a pragmatist, Maya," she said, her voice low so the other mothers wouldn't hear. She began to write. Her handwriting was sharp, jagged spikes of blue ink. "Julian is emotional right now," she continued, not looking at me. "He's in shock. He thinks he wants to play daddy because he's feeling guilty about your living conditions." My jaw tightened. "He's their father," I said through gritted teeth. She paused, the pen hovering over the paper. She turned to look at me, sliding her sunglasses down the bridge of her nose. Her eyes were ice cold. He is the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, she corrected me. He is a brand, and a scandal involving a secret family and a struggling ex-girlfriend, that's bad for the brand. She ripped the check out of the book. The sound was sharp and final. She slid it across the wooden slats of the bench toward me. I looked down. My breath hitched in my throat. I saw a 1, I saw a 5. And I saw more zeros than I had ever seen in my bank account in my entire life. It was enough to buy a house. It was enough to send the twins to college. It was enough to disappear. Take it, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Take the money, pack your bags, move to, I don't know, Idaho, just go somewhere he won't find you. I stared at the paper. For a split second, I thought about it. I thought about the leak in my ceiling. I thought about the winter coats I needed to buy for the kids next month. Why? I asked, looking up at her. Because I love him, she said, but her eyes didn't soften. And I have worked too hard to secure my future to let two little mistakes ruin everything I've built. The word hung in the air, mistakes. My blood turned to lava. The exhaustion vanished, replaced by a surge of white-hot adrenaline that made my fingertips tingle. I looked at Leo, who was laughing as he finally made it to the top of the slide. I looked at Sarah, whose gray eyes, Julian's eyes, were squinting in the sun. Mistakes. I reached out and grabbed the check. Lydia smiled. It was a triumphant, smug little smirk. She thought she had won. She thought everyone had a price. I held the check up to her face, my hand trembling not with fear but with rage. You think you can buy them? I whispered, my voice shaking. Her smile faltered. I'm offering you a lifeline, you idiot, she hissed. No, I said, standing up. You're offering me a bribe to erase my children. I gripped the paper with both hands. I ripped it down the middle. The sound was satisfying. Lydia gasped, standing up so fast she nearly tripped over her own heels. You stupid, I ripped it again. And again, I tore the fortune into confetti, my eyes locked on hers the entire time. I threw the pieces into the air. The wind caught them, scattering the blue and white scraps across the mulch like dirty snow. My children aren't mistakes, I said, my voice loud enough now that heads were turning. And they aren't for sale. Tell Julian that if he wants to be a father, he has to go through me, and I'm not going anywhere. Lydia stared at the scattered paper, her mouth agape, her composure cracked. For the first time, I saw the fear beneath the designer coat. She wasn't a predator, she was a scavenger, and I had just kicked her away from the kill. You'll regret this, she spat, her face flushing an ugly red. He'll destroy you in court. He'll take them from you for free. Let him try, I said, stepping closer to her, forcing her to back away. Get out of my park. She glared at me one last time, turned on her heel and marched away, her footsteps furious and heavy. I watched her go. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked down at the grass. A single piece of the check was stuck to the toe of my sneaker. I kicked it away. I had just thrown away a fortune. I had just declared war on a billionaire and his shark of a fiancé. But as I looked over at Leo and Sarah, who were now chasing each other around the slide, I didn't feel poor. I felt invincible. I'm Maya, 30 years old, and I just learned that a billionaire doesn't get sad when he loses control. He gets litigious. My hands were still shaking when I locked the deadbolt behind me. I leaned my forehead against the peeling white paint of the door, listening to the heavy thud of my own heart. It was louder than the traffic outside. It was louder than Leo and Sarah, who were currently fighting over who got to take their shoes off first in the hallway. I had just torn up a check that could have solved every problem I had ever known. I had thrown financial freedom into the wind because my pride and my maternal instinct told me it was blood money. But now, in the quiet dimness of my apartment, the adrenaline was fading, and panic was setting in. I walked into the kitchen, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. I opened the fridge. It was practically empty. A half-gallon of milk, a carton of eggs, and a bag of apples that were starting to go soft. I stared at the wire rack. I thought about the zeros on Lydia's check. Mama juice. Sarah tugged at my jeans. I looked down at her. She had chocolate smudge on her cheek from who knows where. I forced a smile, but my lips felt numb. Water today, baby, I whispered. We're out of juice. She pouted, but she scampered off. I checked the time on the microwave. 11:45 a.m. I needed to sit down. I sank onto the floor right there in the kitchen, pulling my knees to my chest. Then my phone buzzed. It was sitting on the counter above me. It buzzed again and again. A long, continuous vibration that rattled against the cheap laminate. I stood up, a feeling of dread pooling in my stomach like cold grease. I picked it up. My screen was lit up with notifications, not text, news alerts, gossip column update, Business Insider alert, trending on Twitter. My thumb hovered over the first one. Billionaire Julian Thorne, secret HEIRS revealed. My breath hitched. I clicked the next one. Scandal in the city. Who is the mystery woman hiding Thorne's twins? The room started to spin. Lydia hadn't just gone home to cry. She had gone to war, or maybe Julian had. I tapped on a link to a live video. It was a reporter standing outside Julian's headquarters, the massive glass tower downtown that I could see from my bedroom window if I craned my neck. Sources close to the CEO say he was kept in the dark for 4 years, the reporter was saying, her blonde hair whipping in the wind. They allege a deliberate concealment of paternity. Concealment. They were spinning it. They were making me the villain who stole a father's rights, not the girl he abandoned when she was 22. My phone chimed again. This time it wasn't a news alert. It was an email. The subject line was in all caps. Urgent, service of process THORNEVDANILS. The sender was a law firm. I knew the name. Everyone in the city knew the name. They were the sharks you hired when you wanted to destroy someone so completely that even their ancestors felt it. My fingers trembled so badly I dropped the phone. It clattered onto the linoleum. I scrambled to pick it up, cracking the screen in the corner. I opened the email. I didn't understand half the legal jargon, but I understood the words that mattered. Emergency ex parte motion. Immediate custody. Unfit living conditions. I let out a gasp that sounded like a wounded animal. He used it against me. Last night, the tears in his eyes when he looked at my heater, the way he touched the damp wall, the way he sobbed about how we lived. I thought he was crying because he was heartbroken that we had struggled. I was wrong. He was gathering evidence. He was building a case. He looked at my poverty, the poverty he caused by leaving me, and he decided it was proof that I wasn't good enough to keep them. Mama, Leo was standing in the doorway holding his toy truck. Why are you crying? I hadn't realized I was crying until I felt the hot, wet tracks sliding down my face. I looked at him. He had Julian's nose. He had Julian's stubborn chin. I looked back at the phone. The news alerts were still coming. Julian Thorne releases statement. My children are my priority. I felt sick. A slow, sickening roll in my gut that threatened to empty the coffee from my stomach. I realized then that the man who held my hand in the hospital years ago was dead. The man who cried in my living room last night was a mirage. Julian didn't want a family. He didn't want reconciliation. He wanted heirs. He wanted to acquire them the same way he acquired a failing company, hostile takeover. Lydia was right about one thing: he was a brand, and he was coming to repossess his assets. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, smearing the tears. I stood up. My knees were shaking, but my spine was straight. I looked at Leo. I'm not crying, baby, I lied, my voice cracking. I'm just getting ready. For what? He asked, tilting his head. I looked out the window at the glass tower in the distance, shining like a weapon in the sun. For a fight, I whispered. I'm Maya, 30 years old, and I am currently watching a nurse in blue scrubs harvest my children's DNA like she is collecting evidence at a crime scene. The clinic smelled like bleach and cheap lemon floor cleaner. It was a sharp chemical scent that coated the back of my throat. I sat on the edge of the crinkly paper that covered the exam table, my hands gripping the metal edge so hard my knuckles turned white. Open big, sweetie, like a hippo, the technician said. She was a kind woman with tired eyes. She held a long cotton swab in her gloved hand. Leo opened his mouth. I watched the swab disappear past his lips, scraping against the inside of his cheek. My stomach turned over. It was a simple, painless procedure, but it felt like a violation. It felt like I was handing over pieces of them to the enemy. Julian was standing in the corner of the small room. He wasn't wearing the soft sweaters he used to wear when we dated. He was wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my entire apartment building. He had his arms crossed over his chest. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring intently at the swab in the nurse's hand. He looked like a hawk watching a field mouse. Okay, all done with the handsome man, the nurse chirped, dropping the swab into a plastic tube. Now for the princess. Sarah hesitated. She looked at me, her lower lip trembling. It's okay, baby, I whispered, though my own voice sounded thin and brittle. Just a tickle. She opened her mouth. The nurse scraped. Sarah gagged a little, her eyes watering. My maternal instinct screamed at me to slap the nurse's hand away, to grab my children, to run out the door and never look back. But I stayed frozen. I had to. The court order in my purse said I had no choice. All set, the nurse said, sealing the second tube with a definitive snap. That sound echoed in the small room like a gunshot. Results will be expedited, she said, looking between Julian and me. 48 hours. She sensed the tension. She practically ran out of the room to give us privacy. The silence that followed was suffocating. It was heavy and thick, pressing against my eardrums. Leo and Sarah immediately slid off the exam table and ran toward a small, battered wooden train set in the corner of the room. They started bickering over the blue engine. Normal noises. Happy noises. I looked at Julian. He had moved closer to them. He was watching them play. For a split second, the lighting in the room softened. His shoulders dropped an inch. A small, genuine smile tugged at the corner of his mouth as he watched Leo crash the train into a wooden block. My heart gave a painful, hopeful throb. That was the Julian I remembered. That was the man who used to make me laugh until my sides hurt, the man who liked extra foam on his cappuccino. I thought maybe he just wants to know them, maybe this isn't war. Then he looked up, our eyes met. The softness evaporated instantly. It was like a shutter slamming down over a camera lens. His eyes were no longer warm, they were calculating. He wasn't looking at me as the mother of his children. He was looking at me as a liability. He looked back at the twins and the smile was gone, replaced by a critical, assessing stare. He wasn't admiring their joy. He was checking for defects. He was assessing their potential. He was wondering if they were smart enough, strong enough, worthy enough to carry the heavy burden of the name Thorn. The cold steel of his ambition hit me like a physical wave of cold air. I shivered, pulling my cardigan tighter around myself. They need new coats, he said. His voice was flat, monotone. It wasn't an offer of help, it was a criticism. They have coats, I said, my voice shaking. The sleeves on the boy's jacket are 2 inches too short, he observed, not breaking his gaze from Leo. And the girl's shoes are scuffed. Her name is Sarah, I snapped. And he is Leo, not the boy and the girl. He finally turned his full attention to me. He took a step closer. I could smell his cologne, sandalwood, and money. The results will confirm what we already know, Maya, he said softly. And then, I asked, looking up at him, refusing to back down. And then we fix this, he said. There is nothing to fix, I said. We are a family, we are fine. He looked around the sterile, cheap clinic room. He looked at my worn sneakers. He looked at the hole in the knee of Leo's jeans. You are drowning, he stated calmly. And I am not going to let my heirs sink with you. Heirs, not children, heirs. The word hung in the air, cold and metallic. He checked his watch, a gold timepiece that caught the harsh fluorescent light. My driver will take you home, he said, turning toward the door. I have a board meeting. I took the bus, I said. He paused, his hand on the doorknob. He didn't look back. Stop being a martyr, Maya. It's unbecoming. He walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. I stood there trembling while Leo and Sarah crashed their wooden trains together, blissfully unaware that their father had just appraised them like real estate and decided they needed to be renovated. I looked at the plastic tubes on the counter. My children's DNA. I felt a sudden, violent urge to grab the tubes and smash them on the floor. But I knew it wouldn't matter. He had the money, he had the lawyers, and now he had the biology. I walked over to the twins and crouched down. Come on, guys, I said, forcing my voice to be bright. Let's go get ice cream. Yay, Sarah cheered, dropping the train. I grabbed their small, sticky hands. I squeezed them tight. I needed to feel them. I needed to remember that they were mine, that I had raised them on scraped knees and bedtime stories and peanut butter sandwiches. Julian might be a billionaire. He might see them as heirs to his empire. But as I walked them out of that cold clinic and into the biting wind of the parking lot, I knew one thing for certain. He couldn't buy the past 4 years, and I was going to make him fight for every single second of the future. I'm Maya, 30 years old, and I am watching the blood drain from a billionaire's face as he reads a piece of paper I could have written for him 4 years ago. We were in his study. It was a room that felt more like a museum than a home. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, dark mahogany wainscoting. The air smelled like old paper and expensive scotch. I was standing near the door, my purse clutched to my chest like a shield. Julian stood behind his massive desk. Between us lay a thick manila envelope. It looked harmless, just a packet of stationery, but we both knew it was a bomb. Open it, I said. My voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. I was done shaking. Julian reached out. I watched his hand. The same hand that used to trace the line of my jaw was now trembling. A fine, barely visible tremor shook his fingers as he picked up the envelope. He slid his thumb under the flap. The sound of the paper tearing was deafening in the silent room. Rip. It sounded like a bone snapping. He pulled out the document. It was a single sheet of stiff, white paper. He held it up to the light coming from the window. I watched his eyes scan the page, top to bottom, then they stopped. They fixed on a single line near the bottom of the page. I knew exactly what it said. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. Julian let out a breath that sounded like he had been holding it for 4 years. His knees seemed to give way. He sank into his leather chair, the leather creaking under his weight. The paper fluttered from his hand onto the desk. He looked devastated. He looked ruined. They're mine, he whispered. It wasn't a question, it was a confession. He ran a hand through his hair, messing up the perfect styling. He looked up at me, his eyes were red-rimmed. Maya, he choked out. I stayed where I was. I didn't step forward to comfort him. I didn't offer him a tissue. I just watched. I called Lydia, he said suddenly. My heart gave a strange, painful kick against my ribs. What? I asked. This morning, he said, his voice gaining a little strength. Before the courier even arrived, I knew Maya. Deep down, I think I always knew. He stood up then. He walked around the desk. He moved with a sudden, frantic energy. I called off the wedding, he said. I felt the air leave my lungs. You what? Lydia is gone, he said, stopping just a few feet from me. She moved out an hour ago. The engagement is over. He reached out, his hands hovering near my shoulders, afraid to touch me but desperate to connect. I want us to be a family, he said. The words hung in the air. I want us to be a family. It was the sentence I used to dream about. When I was pregnant and alone in that cold apartment, hugging a pillow and pretending it was him, this was the fantasy. Julian coming back. Julian choosing us. Julian realizing that I was the one. But now, standing in his $1,000,000 study, hearing the words come out of his mouth, I didn't feel joy. I felt a hard, painful lump form in my throat. It tasted like bile. It tasted like ash. I looked at the piece of paper on the desk, then I looked at him. You left me, I whispered. I made a mistake, he pleaded. You didn't believe me, I said, my voice rising. I told you, I begged you to listen. I swore on my life that they were yours. I was stupid, he said. I was young and pressured, and you needed a receipt. I cut him off. He froze. What? You needed a receipt, I repeated, pointing at the DNA test. You needed a lab technician to sign off on my integrity before you treated my children like human beings. The hope in his eyes flickered. He saw the anger. He finally saw me. Maya, please, he said. I'm trying to fix it. You only want them now because the math checks out, I said, backing away toward the door. Yesterday, they were liabilities. Today, they're heirs. What happens tomorrow if they disappoint you, Julian? Do you return them? That's not fair, he said. Fair? I laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. You think this is about fairness? You think you can just fire your fiancé and hire your ex because the data came back positive? I put my hand on the doorknob. The metal was cold under my sweaty palm. I'm glad you know the truth, I said, my voice trembling now, not with fear but with rage. But knowing you're their father doesn't make you their dad. I will fight for them, he warned, his voice dropping, the shark beginning to circle again. I know, I said. I opened the door. But you're not fighting for a family, Julian, you're fighting for possession. I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I closed it softly, leaving him alone with his billions, his empty engagement, and the piece of paper that proved he had been a fool. I'm Maya, 30 years old, and I've learned that I am the only person who can define my family's future. The hallway air was stale. It smelled like boiled cabbage and floor wax. It was a sharp contrast to the crisp, expensive scent of Julian's suit, but I didn't care. I stood in the doorway of my apartment, my hand gripping the metal frame so hard my knuckles turned white. Julian stood on the welcome mat. He looked out of place, like a diamond dropped in the mud. He was lingering. He was waiting for me to step aside. He was waiting for an invitation to come back in, to sit on my second-hand sofa, to play the role of the happy family man now that the science had given him permission. But I stayed planted. I was a wall. I'll send the car for you tomorrow, he said. His voice was smooth, assured. He was already planning the logistics. He was already restructuring our lives like a corporate merger. No, I said. The word hung in the humid air between us. He blinked, surprised. Maya, be reasonable. The subway is— I didn't say we wouldn't come, I interrupted. I said no to the car. I will bring them to you on my terms. He stiffened, his jaw clenched, a muscle feathering near his ear. He wasn't used to being negotiated with. He was used to giving orders and having them executed. I want to make this easy for you, he said, stepping closer. He reached out. His hand moved toward my face, intending to tuck a loose strand of hair behind my ear. It was a gesture he used to do a lifetime ago. Back when I was just his girlfriend, back before he decided I was a liar. I didn't flinch, I didn't step back. I just looked at his hand until he stopped. He let his hand drop to his side. You can't buy your way back into this, Julian, I whispered. I'm not trying to buy you, he said. I'm trying to support my family. They are your family, I said, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. But I am not your wife, I am not your fiancée, and I am certainly not your charity case. He looked at me with a mix of frustration and something that looked dangerously like admiration. I know I hurt you, he said. You didn't just hurt me, I corrected him. You erased me, you looked right through me for 4 years. I took a deep breath. The air tasted like freedom. You can be a father, Julian. You can be the best father in the world. I won't stop you. I want that for them. I looked him dead in the eye. But you will never again be my husband. Silence stretched out in the hallway. Somewhere downstairs, a dog barked. A neighbor's TV blared a sitcom laugh track. Julian nodded slowly. He looked defeated. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked like a man who realized he had lost something he couldn't get back. Good night, Maya, he said quietly. Good night, I replied. He turned around. I watched him walk away. His silhouette was sharp against the peeling paint of the corridor walls. The overhead light flickered, bzzzt. It cast long, jumping shadows that seemed to swallow him whole. He reached the elevator and pressed the button. He didn't look back. I waited until the elevator doors slid open and swallowed him up before I moved. I stepped back inside. I closed the door. I threw the deadbolt. Click. I slid the chain into place. Clack. The sound was final. It was the sound of a boundary being set in stone. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door for a second, closing my eyes. My legs felt shaky. My adrenaline was crashing. I had just stood up to a billionaire. I had just drawn a line in the sand against the most powerful man I knew, and I was still standing. I pushed off the door and turned around. The apartment was warm. It was messy. There were toys scattered across the rug. The smell of dinner still lingered in the air. It wasn't a penthouse. It wasn't an estate, but it was a home. I walked into the living room. Leo and Sarah were on the floor building a tower out of wooden blocks. Mama, Leo shouted, his face lighting up. Did the fancy man go? Sarah asked, looking up with wide, innocent eyes. Yes, baby, I said, feeling a lump form in my throat. He went home. Is he coming back? Leo asked. Yes, I said, kneeling down on the carpet beside them. He's going to be around a lot more. Okay, Leo said, shrugging, and went back to his blocks. To them it was simple. To them the world was small and safe because I made it that way. I pulled them both into me. I buried my face in their hair. They smelled like baby shampoo and peanut butter. They felt solid. They felt real. Julian had his boardrooms. He had his empire. He had his legacy. But as I sat there on the floor, holding my children while the city traffic hummed outside the window, I realized something profound. He was the one who was empty. He was the one scrambling to fill a void. I squeezed my twins tighter, feeling their small heartbeats against my chest. My strength wasn't in my bank account. My strength was right here in this circle of arms. This was the only empire that truly mattered. And for the first time in 4 years, I knew I was going to rule it alone, and I was going to be absolutely fine.